first I want to before we get into the categories and who you think might win this show is going to be out in LA, and with everything going on out there, give me your thoughts about how the show and what's going on out there. How is the show going to be impacted by the fires in your mind, do you think?
There have been a lot of really devastating tragedies that have happened around major award shows, and I think the really good ones are able to speak on them without making the whole show about them, but also give people who maybe don't have information on how to help information on how to help. And the Grammy is usually pretty good about that. So it'll absolutely be more than acknowledged, but I think they'll do one of those things where it's, hey, here's how you can help. Here's what we're going to do. But we're still going to do this show because a lot of people would like a distraction. And the Grammys usually handle it pretty well. So I expect that to happen again. I know they've already bumped, some of the stuff about the Grammys because, again, they're like, things will not be ready for us to do that. And I applaud them for that. But it's usually an organization that is well thought out when it comes to when travesties happen, disasters happen. So I expect there to definitely be a way that they even provide for people to help as well.
All right, let's talk about some of these the awards that are going out. We can highlight maybe three or four of these, but Best Country Solo Performance. We've got Beyonce, Jelly Roll, Casey Musgraves, Shabuzi, and Chris Stapleton. I know you're very familiar with all these acts. Who wins this solo performance this year, do you think?
I think the first thing you have to understand about the Grammys is there's a lot of voters that aren't definite country music fans. Right. So CMAs and ACMs, you're talking about country music fans. You're talking about, at times, it's a bit incestual where it's the same people over and over again. And that gets to be quite annoying, even on the award shows that are country music based, because they pick the same people all the time. One of the good/bad things about the Grammys is it's different voters. And so you get people at times that don't win the Nashville centric awards that win the awards because you got people in Florida and New York and California voting as well. And so, like, Best Country Solo Performance, like, what does that even mean, right? It's just like singing the song. Listen, Stapleton, to me, if you were just going, just sing it, like, that's the dude. And if it were a Nashville award, I would say that's probably the dude. Now, Beyonce did put out a country record. And regardless of how people feel about it and if it should be this or that, like, the Grammys, they don't care. Like, they have people listening and voting. And, 16 Carriages, I don't even think is a super well-known song, but another thing about the Grammys is that it doesn't have to be a well-known song. Like for Best New Artist at times, they pick people I've never heard of. Somebody that plays like a trumpet with cymbals on their feet will win Best New Artist. So, I think when it comes down to it, you're going to see like a Beyonce or a Jelly Roll probably win, and both of them are people who've come from outside of country music and made country projects. I think Jelly Roll's definitely more into the community, but that doesn't matter with the Grammys. So if I were going to pick, I would think Beyonce would win a couple of the big awards. So let's just go ahead and give her this one. Like her or not, that was a country project. I liked it. But I do see where a lot of people in Nashville are upset because she didn't really integrate herself into the community, but that's not a rule with the Grammys. So I'm going Beyonce probably to win Country Solo Performance with 16 Carriages.
Duo group performance, Kelsey Ballerini and Noah Kahan, Beyonce again, brothers Osborne, Dan and Shay, of course, from around our parts, by the way, and then Post Malone and Morgan Wallen. Even in that group, as you mentioned, things just aren't as standard.
Well, and I think at times people can be hypocritical, especially where I am, where they're like, Beyonce's not country. Okay, neither's Noah Kahan, except he does a version of like singer-songwriter Americana. So you could even say like that is kind of country. Miley Cyrus, Dolly's her godmother. She's done country-ish stuff, but she's not, quote, country. Post Malone definitely wasn't country. So again, I have no problem with people jumping in going, I respect country music and want to do a project. If this, and I were just looking at data though, because you got a lot of great options here. I think Post Malone and Morgan Wallen because that song was a monster. Not only was it played on pop radio, not only was it a massive country song, but even looking at streams and downloads and radio play, I'm going to go Post Malone and Morgan Wallen there because just the numbers alone.
The album, of course, is one of the biggest ones as well. At the Grammys, you got Beyonce again, Post Malone, you've got Kelsey Musgraves, Chris Stapleton, Lainey Wilson. Lainey, it seems like Lainey Wilson has made a name for herself over the last couple of years, but again, a lot of these artists that are in this category aren't your standard country artist.
Which should show that country music isn't the standard country music anymore. And that is the one thing generationally that happens. I mean, you can go 15 years back, 15 years back, 15 years back. A version of this exact thing has happened every 15 years or so. Even talking with Garth Brooks, who is a friend of mine, and he was like, man, when I was touring concerts, they were like, he's not country. When one of the examples I use a lot is like Bob Wills, whenever they amped a steel guitar, they were like, that's sacrilegious. That's not country. So the one thing about country is it's ever evolving, and you have traditionalists that say, well, that's not country. But their version of country wasn't country to the traditionalists before them. So that'll be the standard and what I hear all the time. Now, looking at the best country album list, I think you have a few people that probably won't win. I don't think Lainey wins it. I don't think Chris Stapleton wins it with Higher. Not that Stapleton's not deserving, but there are certain people that, because of the voting and who votes, become a bit of darlings of the Grammys. And I think, listen, Casey has dominated the Grammys before. Her album was wonderful. It didn't have it had a ton of critical acclaim, but probably didn't do the numbers commercially, but she didn't really care about that, right? Casey makes her art and puts it out and just lets it live. Post Malone dominated, and Beyonce, Cowboy Carter, I think that record got a bit of a bump from Beyonce fans that weren't country music fans that just listened to it and loved it because it was Beyonce. So that did massive numbers, but not really in the country world. I'm going to go Post Malone on this, F1 Trillion. And I'll say again, I think the Beyonce record was really good for what Beyonce was doing, and it was a country album. But I'm going to go Post Malone because that was a pure country record from a guy who also had the data like Beyonce did. So that's my vote there. I'd say it's a 3-horse race, though, but Post Malone, Beyonce, and Casey Musgraves will probably be the 3 that are up at the top. Like, if we were Heisman voting, those 3 would go to New York.
That's right. So how have these artists, in your mind, revolutionized country music? Beyonce, Post Malone, Jelly Roll. How have they revolutionized what we listen to every day?
I don't know that they've revolutionized. I think they've just done what the people before them have done, right? Made it uncomfortable. And I love it. Like, when I came to town, everybody hated that I didn't wear a cowboy hat and have a huge belt buckle. But like, I'm from a trailer park in Arkansas. Like, I didn't ride horses. I mean, my uncle had horses, but I wasn't like a cowboy. But I was from a trailer park in Arkansas who also like loved hip hop and loved pop and loved alternative. But I was a country kid, right? From where I grew up. And when I came to town, it was like, this guy, I don't know, he's a little too crazy, not country. But the great thing about, let's go Beyonce and Post Malone. Let's go Sam Hunt when he came out. It was like, what even is this guy doing? Let's go to like Willie and Waylon and Merle Haggard, or even Johnny Cash when they were like, that's not country, that's rock and roll. They would protest in Arkansas. My grandma would tell me about the music he was playing. And I could go on and on and on. I think the dumbest person is somebody who goes, well, that ain't country to anything. Because we've seen time and time again, although you may be right in this instance, we never really know where country music is going. So revolutionized, I would say there hasn't been a revolution, but it's always an evolution. And if it stops evolving, it dies. Sometimes it evolves in a direction that does not go much further because, well, course correct. But I think it takes people to push the format to actually make it better. You're also talking about country listeners being broader, as in all over America, in cities. There was a time when country music was just in the South and Southeast and a version in the Midwest, and there's California country. So the ability to have music go everywhere with technology has made country music different, for better or for worse, but that's been consistent over the last 100 years.
So it's almost like it makes it more appealing. Not that it ever wasn't, but I think a lot more people are listening to it because of that.
In the 90s, when that popped so hard, because we're going through this now, in the 90s when that popped with Brooks and Dunn and Garth Brooks, and we can go through 10 of those artists, it was a bit of like it is now. Kenny Rogers was a pop star. Like Kenny Rogers, Kenny Rogers came from pop music. He was not a country star. He had songs on pop radio. And when he came over, people weren't like, oh, that ain't country. Mostly because there wasn't Twitter and people weren't just angry at each other all the time. But
Yeah.
this happened many, many, many times throughout music history. But people are so short-sighted to actually see that because they don't care to invest enough in. I mean, the original country music comes from Europe and the slave ships of Africa when they brought the fiddle and the banjo, and it mostly from the South, which is why country music then came from the South. It became a working man's type of music. So when anyone goes, that's not country, you know what only is country then, if we're going to continue to root back, is the music on the slave ships brought to us by Africans and Europeans with the fiddle. And so, a little bit of knowledge helps. It helped me because I would do the same thing. I would be like, that ain't country. But I think the constant evolving of country music has to happen or it will die.
Bobby Bones, you're the best. Thanks for joining us.
I'm very mid, but I appreciate that. So thanks a lot, and I appreciate what you do.